We are incredible. We're in business. So today we're very lucky to have Lyn Baron from the Dominican Ministry of Housing, the Planning Division, with us today. And this is the Commonwealth of Dominica. Lyn has over 15 years of experience, I believe, working in the Planning Division, officially within the context of GIS, but I know for a fact that Lyn manages to work in a number of different areas, and in fact is an environmental consultant in the Caribbean broadly. So we're very lucky to have Lyn talking to us today. I think one of the reasons why I had reached out to Lyn and why I thought that this would be an interesting conversation for this group is because the research that we do is sometimes very high level from the academic side, but it's so important to get the perspective of practitioners, from civil servants, from people working on the ground. The context of having Lyn talking to us today is that 8 years ago, in 2017, Dominica was hit by a Category 5 hurricane, Hurricane Maria, which went on to, of course, also be a devastating disaster elsewhere in the Caribbean and in Puerto Rico. Importantly, Hurricane Maria cost Dominica 260% of the country's GDP, and is said to have damaged or destroyed up to 90% of the infrastructure and buildings. Of course, a very important statistic for somebody who works in the Ministry of Housing and in the Planning Division. So today, Lyn will be talking to us a little bit about that and about the built environment, about how a disaster, in this case, Hurricane Maria, has an effect and an influence on the built environment and how you move forward from it. So Lyn, I invite you to take it away. And like I say, we're very excited and lucky to have you here today. At the end of the presentation, I will invite us to have a little bit of a Q&A period if the time permits. So thank you, Lyn.
Thank you, Joshua. Thank you again for inviting me. I do not need to introduce myself again. Joshua, you have done a wonderful job introducing me. I feel like you know more about me than I know about myself at this point. And I just want to say that it has been a wonderful experience assisting you while you have been here in Dominica. I have learned a lot as well as we went out to the field together. Thanks everyone for being here. So as Joshua said, I've tried to condense as much as I can about the buildings and the hazards and what we need to do going forward in one presentation. In the end, if you feel like I have left out anything, if there are any questions that you need to ask, please feel free. I will try my best to answer. I'm going to start now. Let me just share my screen. Okay, so is that okay? Can you see my screen?
We sure can do. It looks great. I'll let you go into the presentation mode if you want to, but yeah, we can see your screen.
I think I should go into the presentation mode. That might be best. All right, so just to add a bit of context in terms of location, Dominica is located in the Caribbean, in the West Indies, between the French islands of Guadeloupe and Martinique. I know most people, when you hear of the word Dominica, you think of Dominican Republic, which is a Spanish-speaking country. But we are a small island, Dominica, between Guadeloupe and Martinique, English-speaking. We also speak Creole, or French Creole, in most parts of Dominica. So today I will present on the changes to the built environment in Dominica following Hurricane Maria under the theme Strengthening Resilience and Reducing Vulnerability. So Hurricane Maria, as we all know, hit Dominica in 2017, September. And the memories of that day, of that night, is still vivid for me. Sometimes when I speak about it, I get a bit emotional. And I always tell people that it's one thing learning about hurricanes and hazards and so on, and experiencing it. I did geography in high school, in college, at university, and I continue to work as a geographer and studying, going to school. And nothing that I learned prepared me for that night. You hear the wind, they put it nicely in the textbooks, in the videos and so on, but when you experience it, I remember telling my mom that I've gone to school and nothing could have prepared me for what we went through that night through Hurricane Mary. These were the longest hours of my life, and I always say, if there's another hurricane, that I'll be boarding a plane, a boat, a raft, and I will be leaving Dominica, because it was that bad. We had economic losses of over 200% of the GDP, an estimated 1.3 billion. Even worse, the human impact, 65 deaths, which doesn't seem like a large number, but for a small country, that's a huge impact. So many communities were touched, so many families lost their mothers, their fathers, their children, and even thousands were also displaced. We had a lot of migration. Some people who lost everything were forced to move. Others decided to stay, like me, and others like me, we decided to stay and brave it out. But for some, it was just too much to bear, and that I can also understand. So coming out of Hurricane Maria, we all saw the importance of resilient infrastructure and more robust disaster preparedness for Dominica and for the rest of the Caribbean. For me, Dominica would stand as a perfect example for all the other islands, what we went through, how we're still navigating through the effects of Hurricane Maria, because as we can imagine, when you have a storm like this destroying over 90% of your infrastructure, 200% of your GDP, it is not something you are able to come out of in 1, 2, 5, or even 10 years. Now, what puts us in a really poor state, I should say, in Dominica is our location. Our location and our situation. We are a small island developing state. We are located smack in the middle of the island chains in the West Indies, in the Caribbean. And sometimes it seems like every single hurricane is always looking at Dominica. Sometimes they miss, but Hurricane Maria had a direct hit. We face many natural hazards besides hurricanes. Well, whenever we have hurricanes and the intense rainfall, we also have landslides, floods, and we also have to deal with earthquakes because of our volcanoes. We have many active volcanic centers in Dominica. But what we deal with frequently are hurricanes, landslides, and the floods that come with it. For the hurricanes, we deal with the winds, the strong winds. During Hurricane Maria, I think there were approximately 1,400 landslides all over Dominica. These were mapped by the University of Twente using satellite imagery in the aftermath of Hurricane Maria just a few days later, and they shared that data with us, that there were over 1,400 landslides in Dominica, varying sizes, different types, but 1,400 slides. So you can imagine how intense the hurricane was and the effect. We also had many floods all over Dominica. We had flooding in areas that you could never imagine. Every single dry ravine came to life. Little ravines that you'd pass by and not notice, they turned into huge rivers. They were converted into huge rivers during Hurricane Maria. We also have to deal with the impact of climate change. We see frequent weather. For this year, I've noticed, I don't have the data or the statistics for that, but from my experience this year, we've had a lot of rain in what we would normally call our dry season. So normally in January, February, March, and April would be a bit drier. but it was very wet. It is still very wet. So we did not really get quite the dry season this year. So you are seeing a lot of changes. And even this week, on Sunday, we had a rainfall episode where a community in the northeast, Kalibishi, we normally don't have too many issues with flood. We had floods in Kalibishi over this weekend. So we are currently dealing with a lot of changes, not just the effect of Hurricane Maria. Okay, so based on the damage assessment that was done, and these images you see, they may not be of a high quality because I took them myself. That was the day after Hurricane Maria. I went walking in my community, and you could see, I live in the south in Granby, and you could see as far as small communities like Fosseja clearly from where I was standing. So 90% of the buildings were destroyed. As you can see, the mountains, the trees, most of the trees were just looking like sticks. I've never seen that before. You could see most of the houses, there was no roof. They didn't have their roof, there was nothing. There was 100% loss of electricity and water services. Most people were left without water, without electricity for even months after the hurricane. And 98% of agricultural crops were destroyed. Bananas, vegetables, even some root crops in some areas. And some of the key sectors affected were housing, transportation, utility, health, and education. But all in, when you look at it, all sectors in Dominica were severely affected by Hurricane Maria. So if we're to look at the buildings and we're to look at how we changed, let's first look at the hazards. For Dominica, as I said before, we are facing the strong winds from hurricane, the intense rainfall, landslides, and the flood. And if we are to understand why, Joshua, you have been to Dominica, so you would know our topography. We have steep slopes, and in some places, unstable rock faces and unstable soil. So it's very easy in some areas to have landslides. We have done some mapping in Dominica for the vulnerable areas. We have some really good maps in terms of flooding and landsliding specifically. We have had some assistance from the University of Twente, Netherlands, and we continue receiving this. We receive assistance from them every year as they have master's students who come to Dominica. They do their projects with our assistance, and we also have the professors who also come to Dominica, and we assist them every year. And we also participate in as acting as external examiners for the projects that they produce. We also use GIS and remote sensing for hazard analysis. We use LiDAR, drone mapping for landslide risk assessment. In terms of measures for flood resilience, these that I mentioned here, it's not something that is done in every single area in Dominica, but you have interventions in different places. So we have improved drainage system in some areas, riverbank stabilization. We also have, within watersheds, we had this reforestation project where 3 major watersheds were reforested, and we also had a lot of reforestation near riverbanks. The construction of buildings outside of floodplains is encouraged, and there are some early warning systems that were installed in some areas. In terms of landslide mitigation strategies, which is a bit more difficult because it is something that we have to deal with all over Dominica. Imagine having 1,400 landslides, and these landslides are not just in the interior. They are in residential areas, they're near roads, they're near schools, they're in coastal areas. So it's not a one-size-fits-all solution to landslide mitigation. So in some areas, we have slope stabilization, such as retaining walls and terracing. Like I mentioned, there is vegetative cover restoration, erosion control, monitoring and early warning system. And another thing that we try to map especially the major landslides, as they occur, to see what interventions can be used. And if you see below, there's a photo of the last photograph is of the Petit Soufrière landslide, which occurred, I believe, 2 years ago. This was a major landslide in the northeast in the east coast, sorry, of Dominica. Okay, so to look at the buildings now, there's a hurricane resilience and wind load consideration. Reinforced roofing hurricane straps are used in some areas where the funds are available. The citizens use impact-resistant windows, elevations of buildings, and securing of foundations. And one of the things that we saw coming out of Hurricane Maria is that some of the traditional buildings in the second photo below, while more recent buildings were completely destroyed, some of the small traditional buildings that were built sometimes in the 80s and so on, they were able to somehow, they were able to withstand the storm, while bigger buildings that were recently constructed were destroyed. So we're seeing that in Dominica, we need to look back at how these small houses were built, the methods that were used, and perhaps this can be replicated to some extent today. We also had the 2022 Building Regulations of Dominica, which established comprehensive standards for the design and construction of buildings, emphasizing resilience to natural hazards such as hurricanes and earthquakes. So coming out of Hurricane Maria, we had the Building Regulations, which was officially adopted in 2022. Within that, the Building Code, which is integrated within these regulations, outlines the requirements for construction materials, structural integrity, fire safety, plumbing, and electrical systems. It also includes guidelines for the design and construction of simple buildings such as private dwellings and small retail shops under 3,000 square foot. Now, one of the things, and it's not really new, but it's growing in Dominica, the community involvement. Normally before, this is my personal view, that a lot of things were done from the top-down approach. But now we're seeing that the community-based approach is very important, empowering communities for training and awareness programs, for example, in construction, in data collection, in disaster preparedness. This is key to help boost our level of preparedness for hurricanes or any other hazards that we face. The communities need to be educated, the communities need to be empowered. This helps to build a culture of resilience. The involvement of youth and skills is also important. The local government, village councils, and community enhancement committees are part and parcel of this process. At this point, I would not say that every single community is at the same level in terms of involvement and capacity building and training. But I believe as we are going along, more and more communities are coming on board. All right, so some of the challenges that we face. Resilient infrastructure comes at a high cost. Small island developing states depend a lot on funding. There are existing funding gaps and sometimes donor fatigue. It is sometimes challenging to balance development and environmental conservation. How do we balance protecting the road where people traverse every day near the coast and not harm the coral reefs? We would like to build a seawall, but we'd like to do it in a way that the coral reefs are not damaged, which is also important for the fishing industry and for the tourism industry. While all these efforts are going on, you're investing in infrastructure, you're investing in assisting the communities, we are still facing hurricanes. Hurricane season is upon us June 1st, which is in 2 weeks. So while we're doing all of this, there's a possibility that we may take 10 steps backwards. And that is something that we face every year. And we also have, outside of the hurricane season, rainfall events like what we had last week, where we had flooding in Calibishi, which doesn't normally flood. So this is one of the challenges, that you may get to a certain point, but at the same time, whatever you do might be completely wiped out at any time. And that, for me, in my opinion, that is one of the biggest challenges that we face. Okay, so future directions and recommendations. This is not a complete list. I'm just looking at the most important ones. And some of them are ongoing. Rebuild with resilience, prioritize climate smart, resilient infrastructure to protect against future storms and reduce disaster risk, which is what I just spoke of. We need to rebuild with resilience. So when we have storms, even events outside of storms, that we can come back from that. Strengthen community preparedness, although this is an ongoing effort, but it needs to be improved by investing in early warning systems, emergency shelters, community disaster response training to enhance local resilience. Restore and protect ecosystems. Again, this is something that is ongoing in certain areas. We have reforestations, we have different projects that are aimed at looking at the ecosystem approach to fisheries, ecosystem approach to agriculture, and to look at everything in a holistic view, not just by itself. So this is one of the things that's ongoing in Dominican right now. Support economic recovery, provide grants, loans, and technical support for small businesses and farmers and fishers to restore livelihoods and to rebuild local economy. This is also important. We have a lot of small businesses and fishermen, because we're a small island, farmers, and so on. So they need to be empowered. So in so doing, Dominica itself will be empowered. Promote renewable energy, accelerate the shift to renewable energy sources like geothermal, solar, and wind to reduce reliance on fossil fuels that increase energy security. Right now, we have the geothermal project, which is ongoing. So that is one way we're going in the right direction. Okay, thank you. That brings me to the end of my presentation.
That was fantastic, Lyn. Thank you so much, and so interesting. I think one of the things that's so important, again, for the context of having you talking here today, is that it's so easy within academia to sort of get focused in on, what, like you were saying at the beginning, learning about hazards, learning about disasters, but experiencing them and seeing the actual effects of them is an entirely different story. I, of course, have a number of questions for you and want this to be an open discussion for everyone here, to ask Lyn any questions that you have with respect to the experience that Lyn has had working in housing and the planning division in a country that has experienced as devastating a disaster as Dominica has. But I want to start off by asking